welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
This is Jessikah with Syosset Library's podcast, Turn the Page. And today we have a really cool guest because I can honestly say that you are different than many of the other authors and guests we've interviewed. Your topic of expertise is quite mysterious. And the book that you just came out with is just such a cool concept. So tell us who you are and what your book is about.
Sure. Well, I'm delighted to be here. Hello, Syosset. My name is Joshua J., and I am a professional magician. So this book is my love letter to magic. It's called How Magicians Think, Misdirection, Deception, and Why Magic Matters. And basically, the book came about for the simple reason that, like you say, I'm not the typical profession. And so when people hear that I'm a magician, they have all these questions like, oh my God, what happens if you screw up a trick on stage? Oh my God, do you create your own tricks? Was Houdini as good as everybody says? Who's the best magician in the world? And, when you've spent your whole life since 7 years old, as I have, in magic, you sort of learn the 40, 50 questions that everybody wants to know. And every one of those questions has become the jump off point for a different chapter, a different essay in this book.
So when I was 4, I wanted to be a magician, but then when I was 7, I decided I wanted to be a veterinarian. Clearly, I am doing none of those things, but I do recall finding just a really interesting mystique in the idea of illusion. And I had like this little box that I would walk around with that I got from my local magic shop. I don't know if it's around anymore, but here on Long Island, there was a magic shop in Hicksville, and it was just the coolest place. So I used to perform for like other kids, and I was very much mesmerized by the magicians that I saw on television and hearing just about how insular the community is and how there's really like you don't give away tricks. Do you first of all tell us a little bit about how you got into it, and then just a little bit about some of the points that you talk about in your book? I mean, you cover everything from like Penn and Teller, who almost like they integrate story into their tricks, and David Blaine, who is he more of an illusionist? So really, just as a jumping off point, how did you get into magic? And then how did you decide what you were going to give attention to in this book?
Sure. Well, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, it's interesting when you describe that you wanted to become a magician. You wanted to do something because you saw this magic shop. And immediately what comes to mind, and I talk about this in How Magicians Think, is that magic shops, you wondered aloud if that shop is still there. I can almost assure you it is not. Magic shops have been all but replaced by the internet. All magic shops now are online, and we've lost something really important in our magic culture by the fact that kids, as you did, won't be able to go to that shop and get lost and discover a great magic trick. And the second thing that I thought about when you said that you wanted to be a magician when you were a kid is I think that's really typical. It used to be more typical of boys than girls, but now I think that it's a more welcoming place and that we're seeing it from all kids. And they used to say in magic that everybody gets into magic for different reasons, but I actually think that's not true. I talk about in the book that I think everybody gets into magic for the same reason, but those of us who stay for different reasons. And the reason that we all get into magic, I think everybody wants basically the same thing, which is we want to do magic for our friends. We want to do something that nobody can figure out and have this cool talent. What you discover, even at 5, 6, 7 years old, is that that's sort of unfulfilling, because you realize, oh, this takes serious work and this takes serious ingenuity and serious creativity, and it's not going to happen overnight. You don't just buy a trick and then boom, you've got this amazing thing. It takes work. So those of us who stay in it because we love that challenge, or we particularly love presenting, or we particularly love setting our minds, our goal on perfecting some really difficult arcane sleight. You asked about, you know, me and as a jumping off point, what this book is about. And as I told you, it's about these questions. I've answered these questions that everybody has, and in the scope of doing that, I also got to spend time with some of my heroes. Teller from Penn and Teller, one of the smartest magical minds of our era, and I got to spend a day with him backstage at his show, talking with him about how he approaches his craft. And he's the one who doesn't talk usually, so it's really insightful to be able to learn about him. I spent time on his private jet with David Copperfield, so we got to talk about his huge retrospective of his career and his accomplishments and what remains in his mind as one of the wealthiest people in all of Hollywood yet to achieve. I got to spend time with David Blaine, who is the weirdest and in many ways the most elusive of magic luminaries. And he is a strange guy. And he is driven by something very different to what everybody else is driven by. And I spend the longest chapter in the book talking about David Blaine and trying to suss out what's real and what's not real, because he has this strange way of mixing sleight of hand and magic, which is deception, with stunts that are not deceptive at all. They are exactly what they appear to be.
Yeah, I remember, was it, I think like the early 2000s, he had a bunch of specials. And I think like just the whole mystique of him in and of itself was almost like a trick, because people are so wrapped up in who he is and what the whole persona is, that the magic was like almost like, it blew their mind even more. So it was like, you came in with, there's this guy David Blaine and he does all this, and you were already talking about him. And then when everybody came together to watch it, he was already in their mind as this, like almost like a phantom, and the whole presentation was just even further mind-blowing. So he's very interesting. One of my absolute favorite people of all time is Neil Patrick Harris, and
Yes.
I love him so much. And just the fact that he is so involved in the magic community, in fact, I think I've seen him do tricks, it just made me love him even more.
Yeah, he really stepped into the limelight for magic. You know, the Magic Castle, a place that I talk about in the book, is this mecca for magic. It's in Los Angeles. It's a private club. It's very hard to get into, but if and when you ever get into it, you are going to have the most unforgettable evening you can imagine. It's 5 private venues in this beautiful old Hollywood mansion. It's formal dress code, but they had a fire that put the whole club in jeopardy, and he stepped in and served as president that year. And it ended up being a turning point for the Magic Castle in a great way, in that it really put it back firmly in the Los Angeles culture as a cool and unexpected place to spend an evening. He was very kind to read this book, to blurb it. He gave his support, which was so kind. And no, he's a great ally for magic and a great appreciator of the art.
I think because you mentioned Houdini in the beginning, do you get a lot of questions about Houdini? I mean, Houdini was he was an escape artist, and he has become synonymous almost with magician. But I know that like people I speak to, sometimes people are more like, well, no, he was more of an escape artist.
Yeah, you know, Houdini was one of a kind, and I dedicate quite a lot of space to Houdini in my book, but not really the biography, because a really great one came out last year by Joe Posnanski. There are great Houdini books that are easy to obtain if you want a play-by-play of his life. But I deal in How Magicians Think with the core question of Houdini, which was Houdini the greatest magician of all time? And the answer to that is almost certainly no. Houdini was the greatest marketer in magic. Houdini was America's first superstar, as some scholars have put it, which means that he was famous in his lifetime. He was famous as a superhero, not as a human being, but as somebody who chains couldn't hold. They couldn't restrain Houdini. So he was a larger than life figure. He really understood the bombast required, the exaggeration required to be a leading figure. Houdini was not known for his magic skills, and he didn't put in the practice or the ingenuity that some of his contemporaries, who we may not have heard of, like Thurston and Keller, Chung-Ling Soo, the great Lafayette. These were characters that I talk about in the book who did, in many ways, more creative things, but they weren't Houdini. Houdini's greatest revelation was recognizing that people don't turn out in the thousands to see Houdini do magic tricks. They turn out in the thousands to see Houdini survive. In other words, he raised the stakes. He made magic shows about life and death. He made them about escapes. And his legacy endures to this day.
So just like talking about some of the people you mentioned, who is Chung-Ling Soo? Because that's interesting in and of itself.
Yeah. Chung-Ling Soo was, at the time of his untimely death, one of the most popular performers on the vaudeville circuit. He was a Chinese conjurer who performed all over Europe and the United States. He would do amazing tricks in which he would cause a fishbowl to be produced. He did tricks with silks. He did amazing things. He never spoke because he didn't speak any English. And the first and best known thing about Chung-Ling Soo was that he was shot in 1918 on stage in a failed attempt at magic's most dangerous trick called the bullet catch. And when he was shot, he shouted out, "My God, something's happened. Lower the curtain." And as horrible as it would have been to see Chung-Ling Soo shot on stage, as horrible as it would be for this audience to see a man essentially die, he died 4 hours later on stage, it was equally shocking to hear him speaking English, because the story was that he was Chinese, he didn't speak any English, but actually the greatest deception was he wasn't Chinese at all. He had appropriated a Chinese
Yeah, that was my
act.
question.
Yeah, his name was William Ellsworth Robinson. He was an American magician. He had done several acts and he had worked with some of the great stars of his day, but he had failed to ignite that spark in his own career. So out of desperation, he had a family, he had children. He did what no magician ever wants to do. He copied another magic act. He copied a Chinese conjurer named Qingling Fu, who was actually Chinese, who didn't speak a whole lot of English, in the beginning at least. And he became the nonsensical, similar Chung-Ling Soo. And, you know, it's problematic on a number of levels to appropriate another culture, to copy another person's act. And these are really tough things that finally today we're able to shine a light on and talk about. But all those things said, he was also a remarkable talent, and he devised a really great act. The act never lampooned Chinese culture. He revered Chinese culture. But it's so remarkable to me that one of the most famous acts on the vaudeville circuit was famous for being somebody that he wasn't.
That's very, very interesting. And yeah, no, that's just so interesting. I guess like one of my questions is the title of your book. When I first saw that come across my screen, it was what really grabbed me. How Magicians Think, and then, you know, why it matters. You mentioned that this book came about from like 50 or so questions that you're asked all the time as a magician. How did you come up with the title? Because that's not at all what I would have imagined. Like 50 most popular questions about magic doesn't really sound all that exciting. Maybe a BuzzFeed list at 2 a.m, people
Right.
like, all right. But how magicians think, there's something very scientific about that. And as somebody who is a researcher, as a librarian, I think it's almost impossible not to be a researcher of sorts, because you're always following threads. But I know people are fascinated with different thought processes. So talk a little bit about the title.
Well, the title wasn't my first title, but you this is a collaboration between myself and my publisher, and many conversations over a long period of time. But ultimately, I like the title. It conjures up something for me for a book that, of course, I read a lot, and there's some books that I read and I thought, wow, I want to do this for magic. And one of those books was called 7 Days in the Art World. And this was a book where an art critic spent 7 proverbial metaphorical days. I think she spent much longer than that in actual fact. One day with a art an artist, one day with an art auctioneer, one day with an art dealer. And so what happens after these 7 sections of the book is that you get a real understanding of what's going on in the art world. Another one of those books was How Music Works by David Byrne. Huge best-selling book about his love letter to music, everything about music that he finds interesting. And so when I read How Music Works, I thought, this is what I want my book to be, but for magic. Because the thing about How Music Works is it presupposes that you know a fair amount about the talking heads, about music, about the way music works, and the way it's transferred from creator to listener. But we don't know those things about magic. Most people know very, very little about magic. Most people have a great curiosity. They love what they know, but they don't know. Are the magicians we see on TV, are those tricks original with those people? Are those created by others? Is there some sort of ethical line in magic about how you create? How long does a trick take to work out? Is it months? Is it years? And so there was a huge opportunity here to basically drop all kinds of fascinating information along with stories and interesting characters. And that's why I think How Magicians Think is kind of a great title for that.
Absolutely. It's 100% perfect. And I do think people are grabbed by the idea of looking behind the curtain. And magic is one of those things that, like, number one, it almost falls into 2 different categories. People who would like to look behind the curtain, but it's insular and it's secret. And then, so you're really not supposed to, unless you really get into the community. Or on the other hand, there's people who say, you know what, I'd rather not know, because this is pretty amazing. And they like to have a little bit of mystery left in their lives. And without that, like, where's the magic in the magic? But there is a lot, I think, that both of those groups can kind of come together. And I'm sure there's other subsets of that too, but they come together with the idea of thought process. Different types of professions thrive from being able to connect certain dots, especially performers. And just the idea of people, connecting and putting together these magic acts is just a beautiful concept in general.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say to you is we always had, and I say we because it was a collaboration with my publisher, we always had top of mind this idea that we never wanted it to be inside baseball. We never wanted it to be anything where it felt like this is only relevant to serious magic fans or magicians. Instead, I wanted all of these lessons, because I believe that they are. All of these talks about magic, all of these chapters are so relevant to any creative person. They're relevant to the way you create anything. I think people who read this book will learn something about how they can approach theater, public speaking, art, design, anything, any creative pursuit. And that's why I read, frankly, how music works. I don't have any aspirations in the music world. I don't have any designs on getting into art, but I read these books because I'm looking for insight in my world that I can borrow from these other worlds. And that's what I think a reader can gain from this.
Absolutely. Well, okay, so when is the book due out?
Book comes out September 28th, and I will be doing 4 months of touring in support of the book. So I hope that listeners of your podcast can come see me when I do support of the book. I'll be performing a show, talking about it. And I hope that everybody enjoys it. And I love hearing from readers, so don't hesitate to reach out on the social media platforms, and I look forward to it.
Where are you going to be performing?
Oh boy, it's still being formulated, but it's a list so long. I'm trying to think of what would be near you. I'll certainly be doing things in the city, of course. I live in New York. I think that there's a couple of dates in New Jersey. I believe that there are a couple of dates in Connecticut. There may even be one in Long Island. I'm not sure. I'll have to get back with you on that.
No, that's very cool. We actually have listeners worldwide, so
fantastic.
Yeah, very cool. I guess so. One more question, and this is just like a personal question, because magic is depicted in television and in film and all sorts of things. Is there a favorite depiction of magic in pop culture that you have?
Interesting question. I mean, there have been a lot of magic movies recently. People tend to love The Prestige. Woody Allen's Scoop was a recent magic movie. He made another one called The Curse of the Jade Scorpion with magicians. I think the best magic movie in recent times was The Illusionist.
I love that movie. Oh,
I like it too.
Around the same time as The Prestige, so it was almost like I think it kind of got buried under The Prestige almost.
Prestige certainly succeeded more. I mean, what I'll say is that when any non-magician writes about magicians, they tend to always use the same trope, which is a magician who discovers real magic. And it's just kind of tired. It's just kind of like if you stack, as I have done, all of my magic themed novels together, you'd be astounded at how every great author and some not so great authors has that same revelation of like, oh, it's the magician, but now he's discovered real magic. And I don't know, it's just a bit all samey. But The Illusionist was great because they make you think that's what's going on. This magician, you can't figure it out, but by the end, everything has a rational explanation. Everything fits together, and it's the ingenuity of the performer, not real hocus pocus magic, that gets you through it. The other one I'd recommend to your listeners is a book by a colleague of mine called Bluff. Michael Cardos wrote a novel called Bluff about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's about a female magician turned card cheat that I think is a really good time. It's a really readable novel, and it was actually inspired by the fact that I took Michael Cardos's class at Ohio State on literary fiction, and he took a true story that I told the class about being in a card game and observing another cheat, 2 cheats at the same table, and he took that premise and ran with it, and I think it's a great read. So there you go.
Excellent. So everybody check out How Magicians Think. If people want to come see your show, where can they find you online again?
JoshuaJ.com has all the information on where I'll be appearing, TV appearances, that sort of thing. And you can follow me on Instagram at JoshuaJMagician. And thanks for your time. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate your interest in magic.
We are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.